right, welcome everybody. It is Tuesday, August 11th, which means it's time to get nerdy. Welcome to episode 152 of Two Nerds in a Pod, the nerdiest gaming podcast in the galaxy. We are sponsored by Game Insider Magazine, and I am your host, Maction. And today is a special episode because, as you can see if you're here live, we have a little bit of a change up. Normally, I would be joined by MisterNiceGuy, stand-up guy, and stand-up comedian from Chicago, but he has no power and limited internet for the next couple of days. So in his place, we have gamer, friend, and tech genius, Ishmobile, and our one-hour mission is to bring you news, history, issues, crowdfunding, trivia, and lawsuits that are important to video games. So, Ishmobile, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Maction. I might have to disagree with the tech genius portion of it all, but thank you very much for the introduction and for the time here on the show that I get to have with you.
Well, it's good to have you here. So,
I guess there's a silver lining to everything. Nice guy doesn't get to be here, but I do, so I'm grateful for that.
And we're grateful to have you. And, you know, it is interesting. You mentioned that last episode, in episode 151, Mr. Nice Guy himself said that we should have you on here one of these days. I don't think he expected that his hand would be forced so quickly, but hey, here we are.
It's true. You got to be careful what you say.
Yeah. Now, with all of this being said, I have a huge announcement for those of you who don't already know. And I can hardly believe it, but in my life absolutely devoid of popularity contest victories, we won a popularity contest. We made the slate and are finalists in the People's Choice Podcast Awards for video games and for games and hobbies. So you did it. Pat yourselves on the freaking back. Congratulations. This is how you know we're in the weirdest timeline, because in no other timeline could a popularity contest have possibly gone right for me. But so now the real pressure is both simultaneously on and off, because now the podcast award, they have their panelists for People's Choice who are looking into each of the shows. And will they choose us? Well, I certainly hope so. But welcome to any of you who might be exploring our show for the first time as a result of this.
Hey, Mac, Ralph says not only are we a finalist, but we already got one vote.
Woo-woo! That is fantastic. I can only imagine to what he might be referring.
I do have to say, you notice how liberally I'm already using we in this phrase? I've appeared on the show for all of 5 minutes, and I'm already using we. See that?
And this just goes to show what kind of a welcoming community this is when already you feel like you're at home. So, I'm just saying.
Enough.
Just saying. Now, but normally, as you know, Mr. Nice Guy and I would take a minute after an announcement like that to talk about our weeks and how things are going, saving, of course, the video games and the other entertainment for the end. How are you doing, Ishmobile?
Doing pretty well, actually. I mean, getting a little stir crazy what with the quarantining going on, but otherwise, not too bad. I'm trying to think. I mean, I sealed my fence this last week, so that's probably the exciting things on my menu.
Nice. Did you go for a seal with a stain on it, or?
We did not. We went just clear this time, although sadly we're a little bit late. So we got the fence put up a few months ago, and so I've been letting it sit, but we're starting to get some water stains, so I should have put it on a little sooner. So hopefully they work themselves out over the next few years. But that was my weekend. What about you?
Well, I mean, I am still riding the high from Saturday, because Saturday's when I found out about us making it onto the slate. And I'm just, I'm walking on sunshine, hey, and don't it feel good? And I'm still like this. And I know I've said it before, but I for years have joked with my with my wife and with friends about this award-winning video game podcast that I do on Tuesdays, And now it's like, it could actually happen. You're making me not a
Yes.
liar, and I appreciate it. So love and hugs to every one of you
And at
who
this point,
voted.
I can say that my first appearance on a podcast was on an award-winning podcast. See, so that goes good both ways.
Yes, it's all coming up, Millhouse. Um,
Exactly.
but I've had a lot of cool gaming stuff that went on over the last week, so I guess I'll have to save that to the end. But aside from that, I'm just excited, thrilled to be here, and just I mean, it's just fantastic. But to channel my inner Mr. Nice Guy 425 right here, I think I have to say that it's time we do what we do best and hop right into the gaming news. What do you say, my friend?
Sounds great. Let's hop into it. That's up to me this week. I will be doing the gaming news. So the things that stood out to me as I was preparing for the podcast, one of the big ones is actually so NVIDIA, obviously a company that makes graphics cards, as well as GPUs in gaming systems as well. Now, not the upcoming generation, but they've been in the gaming industry now, or shall we say in the GPU market for 21 years now. So this one actually comes from PC Gamer. I saw it on a few other sites as well, but they're now hitting their 21-year anniversary of the GeForce line. So the very first GeForce card was the GeForce 256, which I will say was not my first GPU. My first GPU was a ATI Rage Pro, was actually my first GPU I ever bought. But they're making a big deal out of their 21-year GeForce anniversary. And so in this article, it talked about, so what's this big 21-year announcement that's coming on September 1st? Is it a new name? Are they going to retire the GeForce name? Probably not, since it's called like the GeForce Special Events. So that's probably not going to happen. But what else could it be? The biggest thing is it's probably going to be the next generation of GPUs coming out. Their 3000 series is on the way, and they're probably going to make the final announcement there. But going along with that, it looks like ATI's or AMD, I guess. Man, ATI, that's like 10 years ago.
Yeah, that's way back.
That was like falling back in my younger years there. But AMD's newest version also looks like it's going to be maybe a decent contender to NVIDIA. Now, for those of you who are in the GPU market, for a while now, AMD has made really good mid-range graphics cards, and they haven't really been in the high end. And so it looks like with this generation, NVIDIA has made a big step forward, but there's also the possibility that AMD might actually be catching up or getting closer to doing so, or maybe coming out ahead. So it'll be interesting to see on this next generation what happens there.
So
Any
now,
thoughts on that?
well, I'm going to put you on the spot, and I'm going to
Yep.
say, what do you think is going on?
What do I think? I actually think that it's probably some marketing hype tied together with a pretty good improvement, 30% or something like that. So anybody who, if we go back, let's say, is that 3 generations now to the 900 series on the NVIDIA side? When they went from the 9 series to the 10 series, they made like a 50% performance increase from series to series, which was the biggest they had made in something like 12 years. For 12 years, it had been like 10%, 15% increases. And then when they went to the 10 series, they made a huge bump. And then when they went to the 20 series, it was another smaller bump. But there's the possibility that this 30 series, don't get me started on NVIDIA's naming scheme, that the 30 series might actually be another 30, 40, 50% bump instead of the little 10 or 15 that we had for so many years there. So it might actually be worth an upgrade at that point.
Okay. So, I would certainly love to see a nice 30% bump in graphical performance. Now,
Especially if AMD can follow suit. And in reality, they would have to do like a 50 or 60% increase to catch up to NVIDIA. But if they could do that, we'd finally have competition again in the high-end market. which would be good for everybody,
So
except for maybe NVIDIA.
for those of us, because not all of us are part of the PC grouping of gamers. A lot of us here and a lot of our listeners are more console based. Where has the money been going with regards to high end, graphics and the like when you're talking about computer components?
NVIDIA. And I would say if you go back even a couple of years, it was Intel and NVIDIA. They got all the money from the people who really gamed, or I should say, not who really gamed, who had real money to spend on gaming. It was NVIDIA and Intel for years. And the interesting thing, and we'll get into that as we roll into the next one, is that's changing on both fronts. That it may be changing on the GPU market, and that is definitely changing on the CPU market currently.
Okay, well then in that case, I'm more interested in hearing. No, don't worry about me.
No
Segue,
worry.
go for it. What's the next?
Okay, and so now there is one exception, and I'll say that's next gen consoles, because next gen consoles are exclusively AMD inside. AMD graphics, AMD processors, AMD cornered that market.
Now, I'm not going to lie, I've been a big fan of AMD primarily from the price point, the price standpoint for quite some time. And when I heard that the, gen of consoles were moving to AMD, I was a little bit like, that seems strange. If I would have expected one place. And it's not that AMD doesn't keep up with Intel, but they usually tend to be a little bit behind. They lag behind a bit, and you wind up paying lower prices as a result, which, is fine for me. I only do refreshes periodically, but it really seemed to me that was a big thing where I'm like, wow, the game consoles are going with AMD? That seems strange. They've always gone Intel before. So sorry, I'm just rambling now, but just
no, agreed. And Ralph actually makes an interesting comment about ray tracing, and we can cover that here briefly. But as consoles go, it's interesting because consoles are shoved into a small form factor, right? If you're building a PC, you can put it in a giant case, no big deal. You can have lots of heat, you can dissipate lots of heat. But in consoles, they have a very limited form factor, and so they have to then reduce that, and that heat has to be both your GPU and your CPU. And Ryzen's doing a good job. We'll put it that way. Ryzen's doing a good job, and Radeon's doing a good job going forward as well. But part of that is also that CPU or console manufacturers work together with AMD in this case to design a very specific computer for a very specific purpose, and so they get to make a lot of demands of AMD. But Ralph mentions the ray tracing, which is the big one that's going to come out of this next area too. Should I cover ray tracing?
Please,
Should we
why
talk
not?
about that a little bit? Okay. So traditionally in gaming, lighting has been handled by things like light maps. You do have like light, but it has a very simple computation of where that light's going to go. And what ray tracing is instead of doing that simple computation, then you get to actually trace individual rays coming out of it. Now, they don't actually trace, all the rays that would possibly come out of it, but they get a pretty good idea by tracing the rays out and allowing it to bounce off of surfaces and track where it goes. And that's something that was really beyond the capability of previous gen graphics cards. And the current generation, not the upcoming generation, was the first ones that had hardware ray tracing, where instead of trying to brute force it through software, they actually have built-in architecture on them that handles ray tracing. The problem is with current gen is if you enable ray tracing, it runs like a potato, like it just slows down. It's better than not having the hardware, but it was really slow. But it was really an opportunity for game makers to start making use of this. And then the next generation, which is the generation probably coming out next month or at the end of this month, that we can actually start using it. And both of the new consoles, PlayStation 5 and Xbox X, Series X, both have hardware ray tracing in them. And the upcoming PC GPUs also have hardware ray tracing. And DLSS, CSS, Ruckus, though that helps as well. DLSS is actually basically AI training of the GPU to make it perform better. So there's that comes in as well. But the ray tracing can also be used for other cool things, like ray trace sound. So then you can have like something like Splinter Cell, where you're doing a sneaking game, but instead of just having a basic, this is how far away the sound is, they can actually use the ray tracing to trace the sound back and see whether it would bounce off a wall and be more audible to the character than it would otherwise be. So ray tracing is often looked at as a graphical thing, but you can actually use that same hardware and trace sounds and other things in game as well.
So lighting and sound, these are all things that can benefit well from, like you said, ray tracing. We think of it as a light thing, but it's really just a mathematical modeling of the environment that's
Agreed.
going on. So I can't think of anything else off the top of my head, because when we're talking about what interface, what senses do we interface with the games at, really sound and visual is all that we've got. So I don't.
Yeah, I can't think of anything else offhand, but the nice thing is once the hardware's there, they're going to come up with other creative ways to use it and leverage it, which is actually something the console market benefits from, because they have very dedicated hardware. They can say, look, we have this piece of hardware over here that can do a certain thing, and we can now reprogram that to do something else really well and know that everyone that we put it on works. So anyway, so that could be an advantage to a console that way, and to the upcoming generation of the other one is actually and this is going back a while, but things like image capture or motion capture, because of the extra hardware is available, maybe you could then use it for that as well. So anyway,
cool.
the thing I was going to transition into is actually Intel versus AMD. One of the other interesting things that's come out of this is, I don't know how much you watch the stock market, but Intel's stock is plummeting, and AMD's is soaring. Now, part of that comes from next-gen consoles that are about to drop. AMD's powering them all. Part of that comes from Macintosh, or Apple is stepping away from Intel. They're going to make their own processors. Even so, they've made their own processors in tablets and phones for a long time, but they're actually going to start putting ARM processors in their desktop lineup and go away from Intel as well.
I never thought I'd see the day.
Well, it was only, a decade ago that they were using PowerPC. So they've only been on Intel for a little while, relatively speaking, but they are moving away. So if we go back to February, Intel stocks were $67 and AMD was $54. Currently, Intel is $48 and AMD is $77. So they have actually leapfrogged. Now, obviously, that's not the value of the company. Intel is still worth vastly more than AMD is. And I don't think that Intel is just going to collapse under the weight and be gone. This is Intel. They've been around for 40 years. I don't know, a long time. So I don't see them just going away. But they're no longer necessarily the 500-pound gorilla that they were even a year ago. And it's an interesting change to watch. As more and more things, there are also major manufacturers like Dell and Lenovo and things who are now offering AMD options that they didn't have before, both on the laptop lineup as well as like in small form factors and stuff. So
Interesting.
Anyway, Galvatron says Apple took a long time to drop Intel, and they did. But it is interesting that they're finally pulling the trigger, and they are spending a lot of money to pull that trigger too, but I would assume long term it will work out for them. So
yeah, I imagine so. But man, that is wild. I would have never expected to see when there would be that swap in stock prices. Now, I'm not someone who, I'm not on Wall Street Bets subreddit or any of those things, and I don't watch the stock market too closely, but I'm a responsible adult. I have an IRA, and it's in mutual funds, and there's, and I've got some money tied up in all of this, and so I pay some attention to what's going on there, but it's just wild to hear.
The last one I wanted to cover, I agree, and it's actually, so I short segue before I transition. I've actually been running Intel for about a decade now, just because Intel was ahead, and that's what I happen to have. Like, I've got an i7 in my current workstation. I've got an i5 on our family desktop. But 10 years ago, I was very much an AMD fan, and so I ended up I'm excited I can flip back because AMT, I now in the end, if they end up, just way ahead of Intel, they'll probably turn into every other corporation out there. But currently, I think they're a good company, and I would love to throw them my business. So,
There is something to be said about the scrappy underdog. We love an underdog
hmm
story. I'm just glad that I can welcome you back into the AMD fold. So, welcome, brother. Come with
thank
us.
you. The last thing I wanted to cover is actually, did you see that Shroud's come back to Twitch?
No,
So
please.
I don't know if you know Shroud. I actually only have known who Shroud was for a little bit now, but he's a major streamer. But he made the jump to Mixer a little bit ago, and as we all know, Mixer has now folded.
Mhm.
Right, Microsoft has pulled funding, and he's moved back to Twitch, which I guess is probably good for Twitch. Although it's interesting that he signed something like a $10 million contract with Mixer,
Mhm.
and since he left or since they closed doors early, he gets to keep the $10 million. So it's not like he's really hurting for money. But the question that brought up to me is, what about the little guys who switched to Mixer, right? Like, because Shroud's okay, right? He's going to be fine. He's still got
He
$10 million.
was
He'll make,
always going to be fine.
yeah, exactly. But then you also come back, because you have YouTube gaming. I actually was streaming to YouTube gaming for a while there. And I chose to do that because I was streaming at 4K at the time, and they allowed a lot higher bitrate than Twitch does. So I was streaming to YouTube gaming. But YouTube gaming has kind of become their side project that they don't really do much with anymore. And Twitch just keeps hanging around. It's been around for a long time now, and it keeps coming around and it keeps staying around. So maybe that's the place to stay. I don't know.
Yeah, well, I mean, for my part, I've spent most of my time on Twitch, and that's where both Mr. Nice Guy and I have done things for a long time. And even though we are definitely small potatoes, we certainly enjoy being here. So, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I I've tried a couple of other things. Like back in the day, I tried doing YouTube gaming or streaming to YouTube gaming when I was doing some crafting. It would have been Halloween or thereabouts a few years back. I was making a uh, Mega Man theme style armor, and I was putting that together on stream, and I simultaneously streamed it to both YouTube as well as to Twitch,
Mm-hmm.
and it was interesting juggling two different chats,
Yeah.
but for the most part, it was just more people were interested on Twitch, and I'm sure that'll change eventually. If there's
Mm-hmm.
one thing I've learned from history, it's that the big companies get replaced by different companies at some point in time. But, you know, I feel really bad for those people who wound up switching to Mixer and
Yeah.
now have to come back. I don't think there are that many people who like burned the bridge on their way out, or at least I should hope that there weren't. But I mean, I'm sure at least a few people did, and that's
Yeah.
got to be uncomfortable for them.
Agreed.
So,
Oh, that's all I had, Andy, on the gaming news side.
all right, well then, let's go ahead and take a look into the past with a little bit of gaming history, shall we? So, for this week, since we broadcasted last with episode 151, want to talk about some of the things that happened in years before. We'll start with the most recent that I wanted to highlight. In 1999 was the launch of the first annual Classic Gaming Expo. I have not had the privilege to attend that Classic Gaming Expo, but the thing that I always find sort of funny, well, maybe funny's not the right word, but the thing that I always find interesting is how words like classic gaming, retro gaming, um, take on different meanings to different people. Back around 20, what I guess it would have been 2015 or so, when I was actively a streamer as part of Retro Gaming Live TV. We would go the rounds on what constituted retro. And for us, at least, and I have a point, I promise, I have a point. And for us, at least, we eventually landed on pre-2000. That the year 2000 was kind of our arbitrary cutoff for what constituted retro, retro gaming. And so when I reflect on a classic gaming expo that begins in 1999, and I ask myself, what would have been at the first classic gaming expo? And that's a question that I don't know the answer to. And I pose to everybody right now, what would you have seen at the classic gaming expo? So I think it's safe to say arcade games, right?
Oh yeah.
Some of the old ones, I mean, things like Dragon's Lair, that was what, 83? So definitely classic. What do you think? We have stuff like the I don't know. We get stuff like Pong, of course, some Donkey Kong and the like. But I mean, at a certain point in time, for me, I just feel like 1999 was still part of classic gaming for me.
Agreed.
You know? So I just went on for way too long there. What do you think? What would you have seen?
That's so on the same vein, I was reading a thing on Reddit today that was talking about Sid Meier's Pirates. Now, I actually only got introduced to Sid Meier's Pirates within the last few years. I picked up the remake at a yard sale or something, which was remade in 2004, which was 17 years after the original. Well, it came up today because somebody was talking about, they need to do a remake, do an HD remaster of Sid Meier's Pirates. And someone pointed out, this is the remaster. Like, the one you're associated with is the remaster. The original was 17 years. What would that be? 1987 or something like that. I mean, you could play it on like the Commodore 64, right? Like, I mean, early computers. I think of things, like Legend of Zelda would probably be, but even then, I mean, would the NES have been considered retro or classic gaming in 99?
Exactly.
Right?
I mean, can you think, for us, our arbitrary cutoff was like 15 years was where, and granted, would, the thought process probably wouldn't have been the same, which is exactly why I think this is a question that's just going to drive you a little bit wild, because so much of what you're thinking is like, oh, but that's 87. That's would have been,
to me. That's not retro to them.
Yeah, that wouldn't have yet been 15 years old. Yeah, so keep puzzling over that. So we do have some offers. We do have some offers. Sorry.
Go right ahead.
So we do have some stuff in the chat for those. Rolf says Pong and Pac-Man were the first games that he played. So I think we could probably safely say Pong and Pac-Man in there. Yeah. So it's one of those where it's like, so what are you thinking?
No, I think you're right, because I mean, if you look like the NES or Atari or whatever, I mean, we're talking like early 80s, late 70s, and those were the very first real consoles. So you could have like Pong, or you could have early Atari games, things like that. But mostly I think you're going to end up with arcade games, because that's what would be like early arcade games. I'm picturing this gaming convention, and you've got Pong sitting over here that everybody's waiting to play, but I don't know what it would be.
Yeah. Spennis does point out Gallica's was probably an option for that first one. Galvatron's going old school with the Abacus. So at truly old school there. The original computational device. But exactly. But yeah, I honestly don't know. Maybe one of these days I'll go looking for the answer, but for now it's a great unknown. But just wrap your heads around that, listeners. If for us, we feel like retro or classic gaming starts 15 years before now, or 20 years before now, or where this say, what kinds of options would that have actually left this expo in 1999? So we'll move on to the next one. Chrono Trigger was released for the Super Nintendo in 1995. An absolute fantastic game. I have fond memories of it, and even though my fond memories were only created in the past like 5 or 6 years, because those of you who are longtime listeners know that I did not actually have a Super Nintendo growing up, or even really access to a Super Nintendo. It was one of those consoles that, for lack of funds, I got passed over in my household. But nonetheless, 13 endings, great story, fantastic characters, had interactions that they could use together. It was Chrono Trigger a game that you played, Ishmobile?
No, I'm with Mac. I'm with you, Mac. I actually, we got our Super Nintendo. We did have one, but we picked it up used about 6 months before I bought an N64. So that would have been like the year 2000, probably, that we got our SNES. And so no, I mean, I had like the classic standard Mario game and Donkey Kong Country and a couple of others, and that was about it on the Super Nintendo for me, other than what I could manage to play at my cousin's house or friend's house or whatever. So.
Mm-hmm. Well, you should definitely add it to your repertoire. It holds up really well. I want to say that I first played it on emulator back in the early 2000s, and I actually almost got Mrs. the Mac to participate in a playthrough of Chrono Trigger, and I did it very sneakily. I downloaded the Russian translated ROM of it, and as some of you may know, Mrs. the Mac likes to keep up on her Russian speaking, so I was just like, oh man, I hear this is a great game, but I've only got the Russian. Do you think you could help me with this? And it worked for probably 2 or 3 play sessions until she was there to see me boot it up and noticed that I had the English ROM as well. And then it was all there, but it was for the greater good. So yeah. Well, and then moving on to the last thing, and possibly one of the most important. I'm going to put a little asterisk by this, but the launch of the Commodore 64. So the asterisk comes because it was, when you get far enough back in a certain point, the actual tracking of release dates is not a thing that companies really seemed to do. And short of digging into like autobiographies or shelling out lots of money for biographies in print format, it's hard for me to track down exact dates, and I'll find plenty of dates that like conflict in online sources and when things are released. So I'm choosing this week to say the launch of the Commodore 64. So while the Commodore 64 is itself a fantastic moment in video game as well as personal computing history, I think what the Commodore 64, it is the best-selling single computer model because it was essentially sold in the same way that a game console would have been sold. You had that model. Of course, you had other models later, but but the Commodore 64, I think most importantly, was a system that encouraged people to tinker with especially the basic programming language, and as a direct result of the way in which you, the player of the computer / console, had to, the way you had to interact with it, I feel like, should be credited as a founding member of the homebrew community. Many people who grew up with Commodore 64s or even VIC-20s credit their computer programming skills to the introductions that they had there. Magazines that had the parameters, that had coding built into it, printed in it, so that you could drop that program into your own personal computer and play those games. Just all these sorts of things that really spurred just great adoption of computer programming in ways that I don't know as we are yet even coming close to topping, in spite of our big pushes in STEM. even to this day. And maybe I mean being as someone who's kind of 1 foot in both worlds, I mean, what do you think of my hyperbole there?
No, I think you're right. So the first computer that we ever had in my household was an Apple IIe. So I missed the Commodore train, and I wish I hadn't. In fact, it's one of those things I want to find in a yard sale or something for somebody who doesn't know, how awesome this thing actually is. And I've only learned in more recent years, but you had like a port on the back where you had direct serial access to the bus of the computer, and you could do stuff with it that you couldn't do other places. It was a really cool machine. And I would love to get my hands on one of them. It's one of those things that I've got on my keeping an eye out for list. Currently, I've got an emulator for one, but it's just not the same, right? Like, because it had a very special keyboard that had special commands and whatnot. There's actually a YouTube channel, and the 8-bit guy, and he does an awesome history of the Commodore, among other things. He's also made a Commodore game in modern times, and different things, like he's programmed his own real-time strategy on a Commodore 64 and all kinds of cool stuff. But he talks a lot about just that it was accessible. He would sit there, he'd get his magazine and he'd program it in, and he'd save it to a cassette tape, right? Because he didn't have a disk drive because they were too expensive. So he's got a cassette tape and I was like, oh man. But yeah, it did a lot. I really think it did.
Yeah. And I
Now,
actually, oh, I was
on the
just,
flip side, I've got my son wants to program a video game. He set a goal recently that he wants to make a 2D game. And so we've actually been looking into game engines, which is something you didn't have back then. So he's currently tinkering with the Godot engine, which is an open source engine. But kind of interesting the things you can do in today's world if you're also willing to sit down.
now I'm so glad that you mentioned the 8-bit guy, because I was actually going to kind of end it off by saying that his series on the history of the Commodore 64 is fantastic and really shows, for any of you who don't know that much about the Commodore 64, just how interesting the whole saga is. And well, that's what I had to say about gaming history. So yeah, kind of cool.
Well, thanks for bringing up a little nostalgia for me here.
Well, it's all about nostalgia in gaming history. But that brings us to the topic of the week, I think.
It does. And so as I got prepared for this, interestingly, it actually spins off the conversation on last week's stream saying I should be a guest on here, but it also comes in from a Reddit post I read recently. But that I want to talk a little bit about a controller evolution. So if we go way back, let's go back to those retro gaming from '99, right? If you're in '99, you've got retro gaming.
One button, maybe 2 buttons, and
Yes.
4 ways if you're lucky.
Now, in my research, it actually gets worse than that. So in the
this.
Magnavox, I don't remember the exact name, but they had like literally a dial for horizontal and a dial for vertical. And so you're playing Pong with 2 dials to control it. Or later there was a controller where you could play Pong. Each person had 1 dial to control their little Pong thing back and forth, right? So that was like very beginning. Obviously, people also did like keyboard gaming on a PC, but that was like the first controllers. Interestingly, 3 years later, the first light rifle came out. So the very first light gun came out in 1975.
And you know, that's not super surprising, because back in the earlier days, before we even had mouses to use, we were using light pens, which is basically a version of the kind of light gun that you're familiar with your zappers, and I forget what the name was for the Master System, but those light guns, it was the light pens. That was the common input method. When you had to go for something that was less constrictive than the keyboard.
Agreed. And so we had the light rifle, and I was actually just surprised how quickly that came about, right? Like here we've got like literally analog dials, and now we're jumping to a light rifle, right? Like that's kind of the next evolution. Later, like the Atari came out a couple of years later with a joystick and a single button, right? So we've got like analog, well, and it wasn't analog. I lie. It was just a switch, right? So a digital joystick and a single button, right? Like that was it. NES came out in '83. Now I'm skipping some, obviously, but it had a D-pad, A, B, start and select, right? So you've now got 4 digital buttons and a D-pad, which is essentially 8 digital buttons. Genesis came out with 3 buttons, but it lost the select. So really, you've got about the same number of buttons. They're just arranged differently. The Super Nintendo, though, on the other hand, you had 2 bumpers, 4 face buttons, start, select, and a D-pad. You got a lot of buttons at that point, a lot more than you did previously. N64 in '96 was the first real foray into analog gaming. Why? Because it was 3D, right? And so they needed better controls. Now, we all remember the N64. That was my first real console. I bought it myself with Star Wars Pod Racer. But it was the weird 3 controller, right? They couldn't figure out how to, they're like, well, they're not going to be using all of these at the same time. So we're going to split it into 2 possible or 3 possible configurations, and kind of messed it up and kind of had a crappy analog stick, but they got analog into things, right? Like they got that started. 97, Sony came out with the DualShock, which I believe was the first twin stick. Now, if you think about that, 97 to 2020. So in 2020, we're still using a dual stick layout. So that was really a big jump that has lasted a long time. We can talk about whether it's the last jump that should be made, but twin sticks have been around a long time, right? And that was our first twin stick. The next big thing that really shook things up was the Wiimote, right? We came around and they're like, we're going motion control, we're going all out, we're going to bowl, we're going to tennis, we're going to do whatever else, we're going to box, and it's all going to be motion. Yes, Master System Phaser. The DualShock 3. So going from the DualShock to the DualShock 3, there are obviously evolutions in there, but the DualShock 3 brought 2 interesting things. One is the analog buttons turned in, or the digital buttons turned into analog buttons. So a lot of games didn't make use of this, but the shaped buttons and the bumpers were actually analog pressure sensitive. And so the harder you push, the more it sent. Now I remember this specifically for me because I did not have one, but my now brother-in-law had one, and I remember playing. It was a racing game, and the name fails me, but I remember throttle was on one of the face buttons, but it was analog. So the harder I pushed, the faster it accelerated. Interestingly, when they went to the DualShock 4, they dropped the analog portion of those buttons, which I thought was an interesting choice, probably to save cost in the end, and probably because not many people were using them. No developers were really using them. So, we've got analog triggers, we can do that. And then in 2010, the Kinect. The other thing the DualShock 3 brought in was a gyro. So again, most games didn't use it, but it was there. So you had gyro capabilities. The Kinect made an appearance in 2010, and it worked for some things. I mean, Dance Dance worked well on it, or there were things that worked well for. There were things that it tried to work well for that it didn't work so well for. But I think that's kind of with any controller or any new controller that happens. You have things that work and things that didn't. Sorry, I was just reading. Yeah, the DualShock first. The PlayStation Move. Now, this is one I missed. That was kind of going into the Wiimote territory, but for PlayStation. But then it saw a resurgence with VR, where it was actually useful in VR. The DualShock 4 added a touchpad. Now, like so many things, nobody used it hardly at all, but it's there. And we'll talk about their new controller that doesn't have a touchpad anymore. They decided to drop that. The Xbox Elite. So it's interesting. The Xbox Elite added grips. So grips are on the back of the controller, so you can keep your fingers on the sticks or your thumbs on the sticks while you still do things. But the interesting thing the Xbox Elite did is it didn't actually add more buttons. It just remapped current buttons to those. So you don't actually get any more functionality. You just have that functionality in a different spot.
So it's more an ergonomic movement than it is any sort of input change.
Yeah, exactly. So like, Nintendo Entertainment to SNES, we gained 4 buttons. We gained a lot. Well, going from Xbox One to Xbox One Elite, you just got those buttons available somewhere else. So it was a choice of, we don't want to take our fingers off, but we don't actually add any more functions to it. Interestingly, and this is Mac, as you know, this is one that's near and dear to my heart. About the same time, the Steam controller came out. Right? It was actually I couldn't find exact date on the Elite, but it was the same year, which also has grips. But they chose, which is what has been their bane ever since, to go with two touchpads.
Mm-hmm.
But it also has gyro controls, among other things. So they chose to go with two touchpads. Nobody else, except for there's like one random company out there that makes weird controllers that's done it, has gone with two
Was it
touchpad.
Mad Cats by chance?
No, it was someone else. I wish it was some. It's the modern Mad Cats. No, actually, and it's actually a controller that's designed for mobile use, so it's designed for phones and stuff, not actually for PC or any of the consoles. And then you've got the Joy Cons, the infamous Joy Cons, which decided to make it where it could split or it could go together. You could have two people use two halves. You could do all kinds of cool things. Um, and then what brought me to this all was, well, what about the next generation? So last week it was talked about that, oh, Xbox is going to be carried forward to the next generation of Xbox, and it's going to be backwards compatible and forwards compatible. And in the comments I actually said that means it's stifling innovation. That means they can't develop something new because there's nothing new. Now, part of the problem is that they tend to not develop things new, because if you're developing something for both the PlayStation and the Xbox, you want it to be cross compatible, right? So you want to just make use of the controls that are on both sides. But maybe you shouldn't. So if we go back to the Xbox, not the Xbox years, the N64 years, nobody knew how to use an analog stick on a controller, really, right? Nobody knew how to do 3D gaming. That was new. When they made the PlayStation, they didn't even put analog sticks on it because it was the first 3D consoles and they didn't think about that. So they came back and they added sticks later. And when you got a new console, part of what you did was you learned the new controller. That was part of the process as you did it, was you learned the new controller because it enabled new functionality that you didn't have in the old one. So my question is, maybe they, or my statement and maybe my question is, should they have not added that functionality or that backwards compatibility because it's going to stifle development?
So, I think where I come down on the idea of additional inputs when it comes to, when it comes to a controller, is that I feel like, and maybe I'll catch some heat for this, but I feel like there comes a point in time where the addition of another input or another method of input isn't that useful for your interfacing with a game any longer. Those of you who are PC gamers, you have how insert number of keys on a keyboard methods of inputs that you could make, but how much difference does that make? How much good does that do you? And do not all of us wind up using WASD in the mouse anyway?
I'll speak to that a bit because it depends. Because I think it's kind of a two-sided sword, or it's a two-way road is maybe the better way to say it, where if there's nothing else to input, then they can only use what they have, right? And because they can only use what they have, then we think this is enough. There are two games that I play that, multiple games I play, but that specifically come up against that. There's actually a sub simulator that I play, and on that sub simulator, Silent Hunter 5, um, you need all the buttons you can get, right? You need every button out there. I cannot play it on a controller because there's no way I have. Now, I've actually worked on setting up a Steam controller layout for it, and I've never quite gotten there. Another example is actually I have a driving simulator, American Truck Simulator or Euro Truck Simulator 2. You need every button you can get, right? You've got horns, you've got air brakes, you've got whatever else you can think of. You need buttons. And then the other one is Tabletop Simulator. So you and I played a game on Tabletop Simulator not too long ago, and I used my Steam controller for that. Now, is it a little slower than a mouse? It is. But the convenience of a controller often outweighs the accuracy of the mouse in a lot of games. And so I think oftentimes games are developed to the lowest common denominator, and maybe in their controls aren't what they should be. And I'm going to use as an example The Last of Us 2. So The Last of Us 2 as I talked with Mr. Nice Guy about this, I don't have a PlayStation 4 myself, but I watched other people play it and I talked to him about playing it. And my comment was, I wish they had enabled gyro aim. Now, gyro aim gets a lot of flack from a lot of people because they always think back to the Wiimote. And the Wiimote did a lot of things wrong that made a lot of hardcore gamers mad. But the PlayStation 4, the DualShock 4, has a gyro aim, and it's phenomenal because you can use that to do fine aiming and get a lot closer to mouse-like accuracy. And so watching people play Last of Us 2, I'm used to using either a Steam controller or a mouse. And as I watch them try and aim, I feel like they should be more accurate than they are. And they're not. And it's not because they're bad players. It's because they only have an inch of movement to try and get all the accuracy in. And so if you have the inputs, you can have them. Now, Last of Us 2 just released a patch and enabled gyro aim. So you have the option now to go into the menu and turn it on and be phenomenally more accurate than you were just trying to shoot with the sticks.
Once you learn to gyro aim, that is.
It's true. Although the nice thing is, and it takes some learning, but it's pretty natural because you're just like, hey, it's like the little kid sitting in front of the Nintendo and he's going like this, only you do it a whole lot smaller. It's not like that because you won't hit. There's also another guy who developed, I don't remember who it was, I don't remember his name, but he developed a thing called Flick Sticks. And he specifically designed it for the DualShock 4. You know what a flick stick is? Does that ring a bell?
Is it basically like a riser for you to put on the DualShocks? Nope. Okay, so I'm not thinking.
Good guess. So the idea is, going back to the idea of, it used to be that when you got a new console, you learned a new controller, right? Like that was just part of the deal. You got used to it. And we've had twin sticks for so long now that you just that's just what everybody expects. Now, as I play older games like Ocarina of Time and I'm trying to use the right stick to aim with and I'm instead, shooting my bow or something, it can be frustrating. But what flick stick is you use the left stick to move and the right stick is actually a direction. So if you want to look straight ahead, well, you're already looking straight ahead, but if you want to look behind you, you flick it 180 degrees and you will turn 180 degrees behind you. Instead of a gradual turn, you just, as fast as the game will allow, you turn. If you want to look to your right, you look to your right. And then you use the gyro for fine aiming. So it's for first-person shooters with a DualShock 4 or a Switch Pro, because they're the only two that actually support gyro. But you can just flick in one direction and then do your little aiming. There is no vertical on the sticks because your right stick, which would normally be looking up and down, is now looking any direction. And so you only have the gyro for that. But anyway, so that's something that has been developed over the last couple of years to make use of the gyro in the DualShock 4 that nobody seems to be making use of because nobody's making use of it. So I guess going back to the question, should they allow Xbox forward, backwards compatibility, or is it just going to stifle games for the next 7 years? Because nobody can work with anything more because they're now working with the lowest common denominator.
I think there is no answer to this question. It's a trick question, but it's a Kobayashi Maru. But I think probably the answer is another question, which is, were we already using the full potentials of the set of controllers we already had in our hands?
Good point.
So I don't think that we're going to answer this question tonight, but it is an interesting one. And for those of you who want to weigh in, let us know what you think. Tweet at us. We'll do our best to entertain the conversation as we go on. But we must away. It is time for us to talk about a crowdfunding effort that's getting off the ground and a little something we call Kick or Kickstart. I'm going to post a link in the chat so that you all can take a peek at what I'm talking about as we discuss it live. We're going to talk the virtues and the vices of such a project, and at the end we will say whether or not we think it should be kicked out of here or it should be kick-started. And what we have for us is a little game called Dead Containment. So I'm going to start by saying that this is not my usual type of game, but it certainly struck me when I saw it. here on Kickstarter. Looking for £400 or $525 to do this. This game is basically an on-rails shooter for PC, using the mouse in place of a light gun, left click to shoot, right click to reload, with zombies. Fast action gameplay, they claim. Single and multiplayer on Steam, or I should say single and co-op online through Steam. Bunch of different stuff going on, weapons, the like, a lot of the things that you would expect to see inside of an on-rails shooter. So this is, as near as I can tell, this happens to be Liam, the founder of Grump Dog Games, just Grump Dog. It appears to be his first project, and definitely his first Kickstarter. But it's not bad. If you're curious about getting into it, a $8 buy-in for a Kickstarter Steam key for estimated delivery of December 2020, because he's looking to build 7 levels if full funding happens. More levels, extra levels, and perhaps mini games if he can, say triple the amount that he's looking for, so around $1,500, a little bit more, and then he can go for some extras and the like. Now, it is currently a one-man team, but Liam here does say that if he can get a certain amount, he'll be able to hire animators, musicians, and the like, looking for VR support and things of that nature. So, I have some opinions, and I'm curious to see what you all think. So, Ishmobile, tell me.
I mean, $500? Okay, first off, it looks cool. It really does. I mean, price is right. I mean, $8, 10 pounds, whatever that is, that's not much, right? 6 pounds, $8. It's a very small amount. I have never played much of an on-rails shooter, but other than the couple of times I put a couple of quarters in at the penny or the nickel arcade or whatever. So there's that.
You gave quarters to a nickel arcade? Man, you're overpaying.
Yeah, I probably did. But it looks interesting. It really does. $500. I mean, that seems like not that much. I mean, I see he's releasing December 2020 is the idea. Now, it does say early access in 2020, so there would be continued development thereafter. And he's obviously got some stretch goals beyond that. So as the money climbs, there are other options. I feel like the money's a little tight on that. And that's probably my only beef with it, though. It is just not asking for enough.
Now, you know me, I've got a big rule, and that is if you're going to ask for my money, I need to see a playable demo. I need to see that you can pull all these pieces together, and it does have a playable demo. It's got a demo. You can get it on Steam. I think it's only like a 200 megabyte download or something like that. And it's not bad. It's a little tough. I am not used to this type of game, and I'm not used to this kind of a movement. It's not my genre. And again, the questions, I have very much the similar questions. It's like 500, around $500 to make a game. You're definitely not taking care of yourself, bud. And I mean, at the current moment, it's at $103, so it's basically 20% of the way there. It's got 25 days left to go, and having played the demo, it's pretty well done. It's got this kind of low poly art to it. We're not talking like original PlayStation type of Final Fantasy VII low poly art, but we are talking maybe a little bit sort of like rounded off low polys, that is kind of appealing. So it looks okay. I like it. reminds me of the time I went to visit Mr. Nice Guy, and we played a bunch of light gun games, and we played like Time Crisis at Galloping Ghosts, and it really kind of scratched an itch for me. There's just something nagging me about that $500 though.
Well, and Pazzi says that looks like a passion project to him. And which is true, and maybe it was a school project. If it's already mostly functional, which it sounds like it is, then adding more content, maybe it's something they do after hours when type thing. I always look at it as, okay, if this is something, if you're a game maker, you supporting yourself with this, and I don't see $500 reaching that, but if the stretch goals were met, then maybe that becomes a possibility. So
yeah, well, what I can say then is I think we've got enough information here to work on this. Let's talk about whether or not this should be kick or kick-started, and I say kick-start.
I agree.
Yeah.
I'm a kickstart on this one as well.
$8 is not too much. It's not a risk at this point in time. Even if it goes nowhere, $8 is not a risk for dead containment. And I've already, I've already tried the demo, and I mean, I haven't made it successfully through the first level because I'm crap at this game, but I mean, nonetheless, I still think it has good bones there, and I think it could really be something. So I think kickstart, and you all let us know in the chat what you were thinking. Ishmobile, kickstart for you as well. Kickstart. All right. So that's been kick or kickstart, and so far we've got one out. Spennis says that he feels like there's more questions than answers as a part of this. But we've got a kickstart from Rolf. And let's see, and it looks like a kickstart from Pazzi as well. But anyway, nonetheless, as with all of these, Liam, we wish you the best. We hope this gets off the ground. But I think you're definitely doing things right here. So you should be proud of this Kickstarter. But who are we to tell you to be proud of your Kickstarter? Bunch of floating heads on the internet. So that's been Kick or Kickstart.
Cool. What comes next? I'm trying to remember.
What comes next? Well, that would be Nerdflex. Woohoo!
I thought that was. So Nerdflex it is.
Yes, it's time for some nerdy trivia, y'all. And get your nerdy questions in the chat, preferably in the form of a multiple choice question, and we will try our best. See if you can't stump us.
Agreed. And in the meantime, while we wait for any to be posted in the chat, we'll go ahead and pull them off of the flippity.net place.
Yeah.
So out of here.
The test bank.
The test bank. Okay. So obviously it's on question 1, so it's time to shuffle. Capcom. Ooh. What film director has a zombie-filled town named after him in Breath of Fire? What film director has a zombie-filled town named after him in Breath of Fire?
Okay, number 1, I haven't played Breath of Fire.
Neither have I. I really haven't.
Number 2, there's only one zombie film director I know, and that's George Romero for the original Night of the Living Dead. And that's the only zombie film director I know. That's the only name, which is why that is my answer to this question.
Well, I'm going to support you on that, Matt, because I am horrible with directors in the first place. So when we narrow it down like that, I'm going to just have to go along.
Directors, the unsung heroes. So, if we've got any other guesses, let us know. But again, get your questions in the meantime. So, what's the answer?
The answer is George A. Romero.
Woo!
Woo!
Yeah.
That's one.
Okay, that's one. Let's see. I always love when we get one right, even if I have to guess. Because it just means I can't be clean swept, and I'm terrified of being clean swept on this.
There you go.
So let's see.
I see one from Spennis in the chat. If we want
okay,
to go
yes. Solid Pokemon questions coming with the Pokemon trivia every time, Spennis. I love you for it.
I'm gonna go into this, Mac. I don't know Pokemon. I'm about 2 years too old, and I don't know Pokemon.
Dang it.
So I'm gonna have to rely on you. This makes 2.
Well, read
this makes 2. That's all you.
Read it. Let's hear it.
Okay. In Pokemon Gold and Silver, you can catch a Lapras at Union Cave on which day of the week? In
Ah.
Pokemon Gold and Silver, what day of the week can you catch a Lapras in Union Cave?
Okay, so good news is we have a 1 in 7 chance.
It's true.
But
Well, 2 and 7 if we make different guesses. I
oh,
mean, there's
yeah.
that. See?
Let's hedge our
Strategy and all
bets.
that.
I'm going to say Friday. Gotta get down on Friday.
Okay. I'm gonna say, Tuesday. We're gonna go with Tuesday. Tuesday's a good day.
Tuesday is a good day. Okay, so I say Friday.
I say Tuesday.
Ishmobile says Tuesday. Let's see who is right. I am fully prepared for neither of us to be right, but it is what it is. And Rolf is going to help us out by guessing Sunday.
He's got Sunday.
So let's see. And it is indeed Friday. You can only catch one on that day, though. Oh, interesting. So here's the question. If you can only catch one at Union Cave on Friday, is there a day that you can catch multiples then? Because the way that was phrased had me a little bit concerned. Well, anyway, I don't...
Or does that mean you can only catch one per week on that day? I don't know.
I wonder. I don't remember because I don't think No, it was only once weekly. Okay, gotcha. Gotcha. Cool. Now, I don't remember because it's just one of those things where, that another guess. So 2 guesses, but 2 wins on this one.
But 2 wins.
So let's go for a third, and I don't see any in the chat live, so let's go for the test bank to finish it off.
Okay, let's do that. So our next one is Sonic. What is the full name of Sonic's sidekick, Tails?
Oh, man. If I get this wrong, Pazzy is going to have my head. So, Pazzy, this one's for you, but before I answer it, Ishmobile, do you have a guess?
Don't. And this is where it's a good thing I'm not a host on the show because I would get it wrong every week. So I'm just going to have to defer to you, Mac.
Okay. This would be Miles Tails Prowler. And if I recall properly, the reason why they went Tails Prowler is because you say it fast and it sounds, or Miles Tails Prowler, or Miles Prowler, it sounds a bit more like miles per hour when you say it quickly. And he goes by his nickname Tails. So Tails, miles per hour. But, yeah.
I might have to take this because according to Spennis, and the answer here, it's actually Prower, not Prowler. So I was hearing an L on there. So it's Miles Tails Prower.
And I put an L there. So, oh no. Oh, Pazzy. I let you down. My apologies. I'm a disappointment to the Empire, clearly. Because, yeah, I totally put an L in that. That's my bad. Okay, so so only 2 out of 3. But Pazzy has put in a question, and I'm gonna field it just so that I can.
I actually know this one.
You know this one?
I actually
okay.
know this one.
Let me read it, and I'll let you answer.
Go for it.
In Halo 1, that is Halo Combat Evolved, what ship does the player start on? Is it A, Amber Clad, B, Forward Unto Dawn, or C, Pillar of Autumn?
Pillar of Autumn. As one who's been recently playing that game again.
Final answer?
Final answer.
Well, you are correct, sir. So 4 out of 3, not too bad. And my apologies, Pazzy. I'm again a disappointment to the Empire. But that has been Nerd Flex. And don't forget, if you all want to flex your nerdy muscles, we have on every basically 4th show or so, we have a sound test that you can test your nerdiness on, identify it, and win a perler made by my hands sent to you. So be sure to hit those up. Well, that's been that's been Nerdflex. So the last thing is a little bit of legalese.
Legalese.
Oh, pitch perfect, Ishmobile. So,
I'm surprised as you are, don't worry.
We're gonna talk a little bit of some lawyers, some legal adjacent stuff that impacts video games, and what we're talking about is Recent executive orders related to TikTok. So TikTok and Tencent, really. TikTok is a company owned by the Chinese company ByteDance. And since we recorded last, the president signed 2 orders citing security issues for basically banning these companies, interactions in the United States. The first directed that all U.S. entities would be prohibited from doing any business with ByteDance, the company that owns TikTok, effective 45 days from then. I could say stuff about this, but TikTok is not what's important about this. What's important about this for us is the second order, because Order 2 prohibits, quote, any transaction that is related to WeChat, comma, Tencent Holdings, comma, or any subsidiary of that entity. Tencent Holdings owns stakes in the following games or game studios, which, depending upon how broadly you interpret related to that entity, would include, let's start at the top, Riot Games. 100% stake in Riot Games. They own it outright. Riot Games notable for League of Legends and Valorant. They own an 85% stake in Supercell, mobile games like Clash of Clans and the like, and a bunch of the mobile games that you've seen. Grinding Gear, the studio, they own 80% of Grinding Gear, notable for Path of Exile. Epic Games, they own 40% of Epic Games, which is responsible for Fortnite, the Epic Store, etc., etc. They own 15% of
Unreal Engine.
Yep, the Unreal Engine. They own 15% of Bluehole, which is responsible for PUBG. 5% of Ubisoft. They own 5% of Blizzard, responsible for WoW, responsible for, and so on and so on, so forth. They own some undisclosed percentage of Platinum Games, which is responsible for Bayonetta, Nier Automata, and the Nier franchise. They own some amount of Paradox Interactive. They own some percentage of Discord, which we are currently using to chat back and forth. So this is not what I would call all of the video game landscape, but it's certainly a big chunk of the skyline. Now, later on, there was some clarification where they said that the administration meant to focus on transactions specifically related to WeChat, because in their opinion, WeChat, which is, subsidiary of Tencent, is a Chinese spying tool. But I think it's fair to say that in the legal system, so much more weight is given to what is written / directly said rather than what people meant to say by their words. To quote Justice Elena Kagan, we're all textualists now. And so that's something to keep in mind. But because this is a matter of commerce, this was an order given, a directive, and it would be the responsibility of the Secretary of Commerce, currently Wilbur Ross, who's responsible for carrying out these orders. And that should be somewhat interesting, being that I don't know if he's ever played a video game. And I will just leave that there. Hopefully he has good people giving him advice. So as you know, everybody, I've been an outspoken opponent of Tencent in basically all of their forms. Going back to episode 135, when I cautioned everybody, do not have Valorant on, you do not download Valorant. The anti-cheat program is a huge security risk. Going back to Epic Game Store, I've regularly criticized their practices and so on. So I was not that surprised to see that, that Epic was a part of this list. So you might think, hey, Mac's gonna be cool with all these restrictions in Tencent. However, I am in fact not a fan of exactly what's going on here. The issue, of course, data security and privacy, it is important. This isn't the way to do it, right? There are better ways. There are appropriate ways to go for this. But just this targeting of Tencent, and the answer is not target this one company that's making mischief with your data because they're from another country that relationships aren't good at. The solution is strengthen privacy laws at their base. And you can't be upset about Tencent taking your data unless it's particularly egregious, and not also be upset about Facebook and Google and everybody who's listening to the conversation and ready to serve you up ads. The invasiveness is still a problem on both sides of the things. At the end of the day, I'll get off my soapbox, but at the end of the day, this could all go very poorly very quickly, depending upon how expansive that is related to winds up being interpreted by the Commerce Secretary. Tencent has already vowed to file suit, and just as soon as we see their filing, I am going to be revisiting this, not in my capacity as a lawyer, because I'm not a lawyer, I just play one on a podcast, but I'll certainly be interested in discussing it with you all as we get more details. But, well, that's just been legalese. And that's our show, everybody.
Right. Thank you, Matt.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody, for being here. But before we let you go, we need to talk about the nerdy stuff that we are into. And we expect you all to share with us what's going on in your lives. So I have been playing a lot of tabletop RPGs lately. I participated in a delightful 5th edition thing over the weekend where we were attacked by a Tarascamasu because it was cake themed. It was a tiramisu Tarasque, or Tarask, however you say it. And as I found out later on, almost beat it. But we ran out of time. But it was, if I may say so myself, a clutch slow spell that was not resisted. It was the first time I ever played a full caster in 5th edition, and I think I did okay.
True.
Playing, of course, GURPS, both on Mondays with Firefly GURPS, on Thread Raiders, and of course the personal GURPS playing just off stream. Aside from that, not really much in the way of gaming lately for me. And watching, I'm kind of just watching the exact same things as last time. A little bit of New Girl, a little bit of Star Trek, and that's me. What about you?
I've actually been playing, I recently picked up Transport Fever 2, which is a logistics or a transport tycoon game. So that, as all transport tycoons, takes up way too much time. So I've been playing that. And then actually last night, the kids and I played Ocarina of Time. We're about to go to Lord Jabu Jabu at this point. So we just barely got King Zora to move aside. Nice. Kids thought that was hilarious as he like they're just like watching, they're like, how long is this going to take? Anyway, so they thought it was hilarious. And then watching, we actually recently started Les Miserables, which is available on Prime. It's apparently a masterpiece theater, Les Miserables. So it's something like 7 or 8 episodes. Amazing so far. And then we also, as a family, watched Captain America, the origin story one. I don't know all the Marvel movies. It's like, I thought it was going to be the other Captain America one thing. And we start watching, I'm like, I've never seen this before. It was later that I realized it was actually, so we're trying to watch them in chronological, universe chronological order. So that's when we started that. Anyway.
Yeah, first Avenger, I think.
Yep, that's the one.
But
First Avenger.
Nice. Well, I'll just run through real quick. Thanks, everybody, for throwing out what you've got. I'll do watching if you do playing.
Can do.
Let's see. Uncle Ruckus is watching The Simpsons and the Boondocks. Spennis is watching Season 1 of Yu-Gi-Oh! Let's see. Pazzy has been watching... Oh, he's been reading Halo Last Light, and there's some good content in that extended universe. Galvatron's watching The Witcher Season 1, Midway, and It, chapters 1 through 2. He's been cheering for Pennywise. Let's see. And yeah, that's what we've got for watching.
Did you get Ruckus at the top there?
Yes, watching
You
Simpsons
did. Okay.
and the Boondocks.
I wasn't sure. Okay. So I am
playing.
Am I playing?
Yeah,
I'm playing. Okay, that's why I'm confused. Okay, playing. Sorry. Ruckus is playing Gears 5, Gears of War 5, Horizon Zero Dawn, and Fall Guys. Spennis, I do not see playing Fall Guys, MLB The Show 20, and then let's see, Pazzy. I do not see one from Pazzy.
Playing the Halo series.
Oh, there we are. Okay. Pazzi is playing the Hilo series. Galvatron has been not playing anything.
Oh, he's down at the bottom.
The very bottom. There we go. Playing The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt. Agreed. Still an amazing game. Xeno Crisis and Streets of Rage 4, Call of Modern Warfare. And then Ralph has been playing Europa Universalis 4, Far Cry 5, Red Dead Redemption 2, and Slay the Spire.
Ah, a man of taste.
Pazzi says he's also spent too much time on Transport Tycoon as well. So
clearly an addictive but good game.
Clearly.
Well, that's been the show. Thanks everyone for joining us. You are the best watchers on Twitch, the best listeners on insert podcast platform name here, and we're just delighted to have y'all here as a part of the show. Be sure to tune in next week, same bat time, same bat rhymes, and keep it nerdy, everybody. We'll see you later.
Hey, thanks.